Hello, this is Troy Eckard with Eckard Land and Acquisition. This is another continuing educational video to provide you and all of our partners more information about how the mineral rights market works. Today we're going to be talking about price per acre. Now let's be candid. Most of you have become wealthy because you're very efficient at finding value. Most of you are very good at finding real estate for value. You're finding stocks for value. You're finding bonds for value. You're finding pretty much everything in your lives for value because it's always on the buy side where you make your money. Well, Eckard Land and Acquisition is the same way. We believe that when we buy a mineral acre, it's incredibly important to start off with the fundamentals of the value that we perceive to be potentially available in the mineral acre that we decide to buy. Now, I'm going to go through several categories with you, and at the same time, I'm going to give you some analogies. So if you can follow with me, here we go. First off, whenever Eckard looks at buying any mineral acre, there's several categories we look at. We look at what's the potential reserves. What's the royalty percentage? How much of the percentage of future revenue and reserves do we get to keep because the lease agreement with the oil company is going to spend all the money and drill it and develop it has already predetermined what that percentage is going to be. That percentage has a lot to do with future value and cash flow. How many wells do we think will be drilled? Because remember, in Eckard's world, its activation is the key #1 element to an accelerated rate of return and overall value because the more wells drilled, the more cash flow we get, and of course, the more oil and gas reserves we can have pulled out of the ground, which makes us a lot happier as mineral owner rights. Activation, what I just described a while ago. When will the wells be drilled? How many wells will be drilled? What's the timing? What caliber wells? All of that falls under the category of activation. Extraction. What does that mean? Well, you can have an enormous amount of oil and gas, but if the well comes in at 50 barrels a day, it may take you 250 years to get out the oil and gas that you want to receive. So extraction for us is, what does the combined technology provide us relative to the reserves in the ground and what that means in overall daily production? That extraction rate is incredibly important to Eckard and our entire acquisition team. GOR, know it, learn it. It's very good for you to be familiar with. It's called gas-oil ratio. There's nothing I hate worse than on a hot summer day in Texas to go to the refrigerator, pop open a Coke, and it's flat because all the carbonation is no longer there. It's an old Coke. It's a flat Coke. Carbonation is leaked out. The gas-oil ratio tells us within the actual geological formation how much gas will be associated with the liquids that are produced, and as a result it gives us an overall quantity of the commodity or oil and gas in the ground, but I need that gas to help push that oil up out of the ground. It is a carrying activation type of mechanism. The more gas I have, the more vibrant that reservoir is, and that's a really key factor for Eckard when we buy oil and gas mineral rights. Midstream. You can find all the oil and gas you want, and there's a lot of oil and gas all over the world that'll never be produced in my lifetime because it has no way to get that oil and gas from the wellhead to the market. Midstream means collecting, gathering, processing from the wellhead and getting it to where somebody's actually going to pay you for it. Really key important ingredient. And commodity values. Well, that's a given. We got to know what commodity values are because at the end of the day, all of this eventually sells the oil and gas from our wells. What are you going to pay me for? Because that ultimately is going to decide how much of this takes place if commodity prices are good or bad, favorable or non-favorable. Let me give you some analogies. So we've been working in the Anadarko Basin, and our price per acre has ranged from as low as $6,750 an acre up to $18,000 per acre. Now, because you're very frugal and because you're very smart investors, you like to think price per acre determines value. If I sold you a mineral acre for $9,000 an acre, and next month I said it's $18,000 an acre, many of you just automatically, because of lack of experience, go, well, that mineral acre is twice as expensive. I'm a value buyer. I'll buy all the acres I can get at $9,000 an acre. That's not how Troy Eckard thinks. Troy Eckard is mostly concerned with return on investment, low risk, reserves, cash flow, duplicity, activation, and all the things you see on this slide. I'm going to put it in terms that most of you relate to. If I showed you a single residential house, one income source, and I said it was $250,000, we have to look at that from what it really means. I got to count on a tenant. I got to count on the creditworthiness of that tenant. I got to count on that tenant to pay their rent for 12 out of 12 months, do very little damage to my property, and hopefully they'll stay in it long enough for me to recoup my investment, my equity, and pay off the debt. That's a one income source. If that were a mineral acre, I might pay $8,000 an acre in today's market for that. When I get two income producing, a duplex, I might come in and say, well, look, I got two income sources, and I'm willing to pay not $250,000. I might even pay more than double the price. Instead of $500,000, I might pay $650,000 because why? I got twice the assets, double the income, single management, and I get the effort of a lot of these different ingredients in my real estate investment that I can also relate back to my oil and gas mineral rights acquisition. You're going to follow this very easy because I've drawn it on the board for you. We go from a single to a duplex to a fourplex to a sixplex to a 30-unit small multifamily apartment complex. When you get down here, you start looking at a price per door. You say, what do you mean price per door? Well, those of you in real estate know that. You say, look, up here it's $250,000 for the house. Up here it's $650,000 for the duplex. Here it's $1 million for a fourplex. Here it might be $1.5 million for a sixplex. It might be $4 million for a 30 unit. You say, wow, that's a big jump. You start dividing it by the number of doors and you say, wait a minute, this seems a lot more expensive at $4 million than $250,000. But when I break it down cost per door, it's cheaper here than it is here because this ends up being maybe $110,000 or $120,000 per door, whereas that's $250,000 per door. Now the reason I'm going through this particular scenario is I want you to get away from the price per acre. Because you're not an expert like Eckard, because you don't know the value that we give to each one of these categories, it's very difficult for you to understand the relationship between price per acre and what we're willing to pay and what we think is the value of that mineral acre at the time we buy it. Let's use the Permian Basin. We're about to start embarking on acquiring minerals in the Permian Basin. If I do a comparison from the Anadarko in Oklahoma to the Permian Basin in West Texas, the Anadarko might be $14,000 or $15,000 per acre on average. When I get to the Permian Basin, it's usually double that price. It's usually $30,000 or $40,000 per acre if you can even buy it. And the reason why it's so important to understand the cost per acre does not determine the value is the following reason. In the Permian Basin, they're going to end up with 20 or 30 wells per producing unit. In the Anadarko, we're looking at 6 wells, 7 wells per zone per producing unit. So when I take a look at the amount of extraction, the activation, the total production day to day, if each well is doing 500 barrels a day and I'm selling it at today's commodity prices of $90 a barrel, guess what? I make 4, 5, 6 times more income off of this mineral acre than I do off this mineral acre as a result of the density, the number of wells, and the activation. As we move forward in the Anadarko, as we move forward in the Permian Basin, as we look at a continuation of building our mineral portfolio, the key thing I want you to remember is Eckard has a financial model. We're extremely disciplined. We understand the value of duplicity and reserves and extraction and activation. All these things we understand. And when Troy Eckard and Eckard Land and Acquisition make that purchase price per acre is not really my biggest key factor at all. My biggest factor is no risk, low risk, high return, lots of reserves, lots of activation, and knowing I have a very, very high level of confidence. That's going to help me make a kind of return or at least a double-digit return that I expect to make on every dollar that I invest. I hope this educational information helps you understanding the price per acre, what we look at, and how we can compare it to real estate investments. I'm Troy Eckard with Eckard Land and Acquisition. Thank you for listening.